Hey, everybody, Dave Hagan here. It's the first episode of the new year, so you know what we're going to talk about. That's right, goals. That's today on the Financial Wellness Podcast.
Welcome to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. Here is your host, financial problem solver and talk show host, Dave Hagan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Financial Wellness Podcast, or the TFWP as we like to call it. You are listening to episode 501. That's season 5, episode 1. In our 5th season. Who would have thunk about it? Who would have thunk? Anyway, this is Dave Hagan. I'm riding solo today, and today we're going to talk about goals. Now, I was thinking about how we would further the discussion that we've had on goals over the past couple of years. And I've got a couple things in mind. But first, I want to go back to episode 302 and listen to a clip together, because I thought it was a pretty good discussion on how to lay out some goals. So let's listen in. Last week, we talked about what would be on your tombstone. We talked about how you would want to be remembered. We talked about the 3 or 5 things that you wanted to be remembered by. Thomas Jefferson had only three things he wanted written on his tombstone. 1, that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. 2, he was the author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom. And 3, he was the father of the University of Virginia. Now, he did a bunch of other things. He did a ton of other things. Goodness, he was president of the United States. He was the U.S. minister to France. The size of the country doubled when he was president. He pulled off the Louisiana Purchase. He signed the act prohibiting the importation of slaves. So he signed the act that was the first step, perhaps, to leading to the complete abolition of slavery. His act dealt with importing slaves, and I didn't know that. Now, before we give him too much credit, he also owned slaves throughout his entire life. So he was no Abraham Lincoln in that regard. But it's interesting that he signed an act that maybe was the first step towards doing what needed to be done. He also invented the dumbwaiter. You're going, what? He's going, yeah, I've had a dumbwaiter before. No, a dumbwaiter is the device that goes up and down on a rope between upper and lower story on a house. The dumbwaiter. So I didn't know that he did all those things. And of course, he did a ton of other things as well. But the 3 things, he only wanted 3 things on his tombstone. Very interesting. The 3 things that motivated him and how he wanted to be remembered were the 3 things on his tombstone. What would be yours? Now, last week we talked about conceptualizing 2 tombstones, one being what people would say if you passed away now, the second being what you hope people would say about you when you pass away in the future. Notice I didn't say if you pass away. I said when you pass away in the future, hopefully in the distant future. I encouraged our listeners to go away to a quiet place and to write down 3 to 5 things that you would see on each of those tombstones. Hopefully you got the opportunity to do that this past week. It's nothing complicated, and it's nothing that should take a lot of time, maybe only 10 to 15 minutes of simple reflection. But did you do it? If so, we can use those thoughts as we talk about goals this week. If not, don't worry. Don't beat yourself up. We can still talk about goals this week. However, before you think about any goals after this podcast, you really should go through the tombstone exercise first. Now, it seems to me that getting from the current tombstone to the ultimate tombstone requires setting goals. Not New Year's resolutions, but goals. Let's talk about that for a little while. I think that we can talk about setting goals in terms of long-term goals and yearly goals. Long-term goals go over the course of many years. They'll be bigger goals. They'll represent significant achievements in getting you to that final tombstone. Some examples might be obtaining financial independence, owning a home, not having to work 5 days a week, being a better parent, being a better kid, and yes, getting into shape. Now, these big goals should be an inspiration to you. They should come from your soul. They should be what you think about from time to time during the week. For example, I think one of Steve Jobs' big goals was to put a dent in the universe. You heard him talk about this many times. He'd get so excited about it. I remember when he was trying to get the president of, I think it was Coca-Cola, to come work for him, and they're sitting at a bench out in the park, and the guy was starting to pull back and not come to Apple. And he says to the guy, "So do you want to sell sugar water, or do you want to put a dent in the universe?" And the guy came to work for Apple. Ultimately, it didn't work out for them, as many of you know, but Steve Jobs was pretty persuasive in terms of getting people on board to his vision of things that he wanted to do. Man, he'd get excited about it. He wanted to do something significant that changed the course of society. And I think you could argue that he probably succeeded in that goal, even though his life was so tragically cut short. Now, some of these goals may not even relate to your ultimate tombstone. It may be that you want to set a goal just because it's exciting to you. For example, you might have a goal that you want to be healthy or you want to be entertained. I mean, these are certainly legitimate and good goals, probably taken in context with others, but certainly goals that someone could pursue. You know, let me give you an example. I heard about a guy that worked very hard at his job over a whole bunch of years, saved money, was very diligent, raised his family, built a nice house, did well. He was successful and thoughtful. Now that he's retired, one of his goals is to be entertained. He goes through the year thinking about the things that he wants to do to enjoy high-quality entertainment. Now, of course, he does this in the context of other goals. However, I don't think I've ever heard of someone who was this deliberate about a goal to be entertained. Maybe we all could or should set goals that deal with the enjoyment of life. Another interesting long-term goal is staying healthy. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean losing weight, although that could be a component. Rather, it probably involves eating correctly, getting some exercise, taking care of your body and your mind. Remember last week we talked about the number one goal that people set is going on a diet. Maybe the more appropriate long-term goal is to strive to be healthy. But this is something that people think about a lot. And some of the goals you might set are more short-term, on a yearly basis. These goals would allow you to achieve in shorter chunks how you're going to get to your long-term goal. These are really what people call New Year's resolutions. They shouldn't be New Year's resolutions that we make up. They should be short-term goals that tie into the long-term goals, that tie into the tombstone statements, or really kind of a mission statement. But the short-term goals, because they come from a tombstone statement and the resulting long-term goals, will be more based upon who you are and what you want to be. They'll come from the essence of you. As a result, they're more likely to inspire you. You're more likely to follow them, and you're more likely to be successful. Now, remember last week we said that only 8% of the people that set New Year's resolutions follow them, and that most people have dropped off the map within the month of January. It's because they are New Year's resolutions. Goals, which come from your core values and excite and inspire you, are much more likely to be achieved because they're you. They're an extension of you. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mechanically, how do you do this? Well, I got a couple of ideas. First, your goals should be pretty specific. This is especially true for your short-term goals. Not only should they be fairly specific, but they should be fairly simple. Your goals for the year should be something that you could almost recite off the top of your head. An example of a specific goal might be having $10,000 in savings at the end of the year. Another example of a specific goal might be, in the general health theme, working out in some fashion at least 4 days a week. My goal for years in this vein has been to try and sweat at least 5 times every week. That is, some type of workout, whether it's running or swimming or hiking or just having some fun 5 times a week. Now, the goal's vague in that it doesn't specify any particular form of exercise, but it's very specific when talking about the number of times per week that I want to do this. Second, The goal should be measurable. If you set out a specific goal, chances are there's some way to measure it. There's an easy way to measure how many times a week I sweat. If the goal is just to be in better health, that's pretty hard to measure, and you can get pretty lost and get off track. Third, the goal should be realistic or attainable. Now, I remember one year I set up a goal to run in the LA Marathon.
Oh, no.
Brian. Now, that's a run of more than 26 miles. Now, I joined a club that would take beginners like me through a program and get us ready for the race. And frankly, when all the training is set out over a period of 2 or 3 months, it looked pretty easy. The training itself turned out to be pretty easy. But what I didn't take into account was the time that was necessary to do the training. I was working full-time, 5 days a week, and the training program required better than a half a day on Saturday and Sunday. And after 2 to 3 weeks, it rapidly occurred to me that I didn't have this type of available time, and at this time in my life, it really wasn't a goal that was realistic or attainable for me. Another goal that I thought about was being able to slam dunk a basketball. Now, the women out there won't understand that, just never will. But I'll bet you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I had dreams about being able to slam dunk a basketball. Now, you should know that I'm 5'11" on a good day and have a body built more like a linebacker. Slam dunking a basketball probably wasn't in my future. But this is something that I was actually thinking about at a point in time in my life. Now, this was driven home to me some years ago when I was working out with a trainer. I offered him a very nice performance bonus if he was able to get me to the point where I could slam dunk. And when I mentioned it, he took one look at me up and down and he says, well, why don't we think about some other or more attainable goals I can help you with? He made the point in the nicest possible way, but he also made the point that it was clearly not realistic or attainable. Fourth, your goal should be rewarding. They should be the kind of goals that turn you on. They should be the kind of goals that you get excited about getting out of bed in the morning. Now, if your goal is to do 1,000 sit-ups a day, it's hard to look forward to getting out of bed and doing that. But if your goal is something that you really love or moving you towards something that you really love or something that you really want to be, it'll get you out of bed. Fifth, you should write your goals down. Writing them down for some reason makes them more real. I've heard people say that written goals tend to be accomplished more often, that it's almost magic how it happens. I've seen that happen in my own life. When I write stuff down, it seems to be more real and it seems to get done. Now, even though you should be able to recite your goals off the top of your head, writing them down gives you something very specific to look back on and reflect on. Remember last week I talked about the business mogul Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Atlantic and one of the richest men in the world, now on the board at Tesla. He's been interviewed before on his success, and he said over and over again that one of the things that he does periodically to be successful is to write down his goals. Sixth, you should periodically review your goals. Every 3 or 6 months is probably a good thing to do. It takes you mentally, maybe even emotionally, back to the place where you had thought about your tombstone statement and set both long-term and short-term goals. It's good to bring yourself back to that place from time to time. Now, it's okay if you get off course. It's going to happen. But don't abandon the goal just because you've gotten off course. So many people get off diets, or as I like to call them, eating plans, because they get off it a few days after they set the course, and then they just decide to abandon the whole thing. They say, well, I fell off the wagon, so I'll do that next year. By the end of January, they're back to their regular old eating habits, and they're going to waste a whole nother year not following through towards that goal. Now, if you fall off the wagon, just jump back on. It's okay. Like I said, it's going to happen. Now, on the other hand, if you get off course and come to realize that the goal was not specific, simple, measurable, realistic and attainable, or rewarding, maybe it's time to think about making a mid-course correction. That's okay too. We'll talk about that later in the year. The important thing is that you make a conscious decision to alter or maybe abandon that particular goal altogether. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to accomplish that goal. This was the case when I decided to try and run in the LA Marathon. But don't just let it go. Make a conscious decision to either alter it, or change it. Now, you also want to set a reward for yourself if you attain the goal. Simply attaining the goal should be enough for a truly well thought out goal. However, you might want to write down a particular reward if you obtain a specific goal. For example, you may decide to take a weekend away skiing or go on a cruise if you save a certain amount of money by a certain date during the year. Now, don't wipe out the entire savings account, but if you cut a small piece off the top and still meet your goal after that, reward yourself. It's just a good way to ensure success. We're all motivated by rewards, so think about that. Now, I've tried to keep this exercise as simple as possible. Certainly, there are many more complicated ways to go through goal-setting exercises. However, there's so much material out there that I think it gets too complicated, and you get away from some of these core values, some of these core ways to get this done. Also, the task itself becomes so daunting that many people don't even complete or even begin, in some cases, the path. So go off alone, go to a park, go to a restaurant by yourself where nobody knows you, go lock yourself in a closet. Think about your tombstone statements and write out your long-term goals to get there. Then write out your goals for this year. Take a look at what you have and then see if they meet the criteria that we've discussed. Then stop, put them aside, and come back to them in a few days to see if they really work for you after some reflection. Then put them in a safe place so you could look at them throughout the year. You're going to keep them in mind. Consider the elevator exercise that we've talked about to keep them at the top of your consciousness, at the top of your mind. Think about the elevator exercise, if you will. That is, if you're in an elevator and someone comes in and says, "Hey, Dave, what are your goals this year?" I'd be able to spit those out in 2-3 minutes before the doors open again. That way you keep them at the top of your mind throughout the whole year. Now, you're going to want to keep them in writing, and they're great to go back to, and that's really important. But you need to have these at the top of your mind so that you are internalizing these and moving towards these. Well, that's goal setting. Something to think about. Good stuff from a couple years ago. So goals should spring from your tombstone statement. And then we talked about 6 tips for setting goals. They should be specific, measurable, realistic, rewarding, written, and periodically evaluated. But I want to put another step on top of that this year. Just one simple step, something that I want you to reflect on in the next week. And that is this. Do these goals get you psyched? Look at them. Think about them. If you're not psyched about it, then maybe they're not the right set of goals for you. Maybe you need to tweak them a little bit more. Think about that. Now, they should get you psyched because they are springing forth from your tombstone statement. But if they're not, maybe we missed something in the translation. Think about it and revisit that again. These goals should be really exciting. These shouldn't feel like something that you're pressing upon yourself to make yourself do 1,000 sit-ups every month. You should be excited about these. You should hardly be able to wait to start to pursue them. You should be able to think about what it would look like at the end of the year if you met these goals, and you should be truly, truly excited about it. Remember, we said last year that the theme of the year was financial planning is probably more about your heart than your head. And we spent many episodes last year talking about that very topic. And this bleeds through to this discussion as well. If your goals are set from your head through book knowledge, through technical stuff, you're probably not going to follow through. But if it's coming from your heart, if it's springing out of your tombstone statement, if you are truly psyched and excited about being able to get through the entire year and what things will be like at the end of the year if you have achieved these goals, now we're talking. I don't know. That's just some stuff to think about. That's what I've been kind of knocking around in the old noggin the last couple of weeks. Stay tuned. We got some good stuff coming up next week. We're not going to do any emails this week. That's a wrap. This is Dave Hagan, and you've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. If you have a question that you would like Dave to answer on the podcast, go to thefinancialwellnesspodcast.com. You can leave an audio message with one click of a button, or type your message into the question box. Either way, it's sent right to Dave's phone. Remember, Dave will randomly draw from the submitted questions and pick the winner of a free 1-hour personal conversation with Dave to help you achieve your financial goals. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you receive the new episode notifications, or share the podcast via the app with your family and friends. This is your announcer, Nick Appel, wishing you every financial success.